Well, Durwood Zaelke is president of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. He joins us now from Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Thank you very much for your time. So your focus, if I'm not wrong, is on fast mitigation strategies to protect the climate. Talk us through what they are. What are the fast mitigation strategies? What can be done quickly?
The fastest way to slow down warming is to cut the short-lived super climate pollutants. These are not CO2, which we have to cut as well. It's not carbon dioxide, but it is methane, which is the primary component of natural gas. It is the black carbon soot that comes from a dirty diesel bus or truck or a coal-fired power plant. It is tropospheric ozone, which is ground level ozone, or basically photochemical smog. And it is HFCs, hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants that we put in our air conditioners, which we then need because it's getting hotter. And yet those same air conditioners that are cooling us use an incredible amount of energy, which is still mostly fossil fuel. So that adds to future warming. And those air conditioners include the HFC refrigerants, which are one of the super climate pollutants. So we talk about the benefits of winning the sprint to 2030 by cutting the short-lived super pollutants. If you cut them, they are short-lived, so they fall out of the atmosphere in days to weeks to a decade and a half at the most, and they produce fast cooling. And this is in contrast to cutting carbon dioxide, which we also have to do, but it doesn't produce cooling until about 2050, starts to kick in a bit.
That's really interesting because a lot of the focus is on carbon emissions, especially when we're looking at what's happening around the world right now with all these wildfires, and we've just had massive flooding in Australia. So what's your assessment then on how we are, as a global community, starting to try and combat those faster mitigation strategies, tackling things like you say, methane and HFC refrigerants? How are we doing?
Well, we put the HFC refrigerants under the best environmental treaty and the best climate treaty the world has ever created, the Montreal Protocol, which was designed initially to protect stratospheric ozone layer. But because the same chemicals that destroy ozone also cause climate change, that treaty has done more for climate than any other agreement. So we put HFCs under that through the Kigali Amendment in 2016 in Rwanda. Brilliant step forward, which can avoid up to 0.5 degrees Celsius future warming by the end of the century. That's a big amount of warming. We're at 1.1, 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, cruising along very fast to 1.5, which is the outer guardrail beyond which we will suffer incredible climate tipping points, which will be irreversible and catastrophic. So that's the first thing, HFCs. Second would be methane. So we have now the global methane pledge, which 120 countries have joined, to say we will cut our methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And that has the potential to take out about 0.3 degrees of future warming by the 2040s. So it's the single biggest and fastest bite out of the climate warming that we can possibly take. So those two things are incredibly important. And then black carbon and the tropospheric ozone, or ground level smog, those are classic air pollutants. And we have existing laws to protect air. We just need to enforce them better.
Oh, it's so good to hear there is some bright spots in our efforts to combat climate change, because it can seem really overwhelming. How important then is global cooperation in trying to do all of this? And what's your assessment of how well we are cooperating as a global community?
Well, uh, this is a global problem, and it does require global cooperation. You're absolutely correct. And the world does, from time to time, come together, as it has with the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, to cooperate for the common good. We also have recently launched a new multilateral effort to do a plastics treaty, because plastic pollution is also killing the oceans and infecting all of us with, a credit card's worth of plastic in our system. It's in the placenta of newborn babies. So there is some continuing appetite for multi-level cooperation. It's not easy because we need China, we need India, we need Russia. And so the question is, can we cooperate on climate change even as we fight about human rights or about the invasion of the Ukraine, other very important issues that that we need to solve as well. So I do think we still can pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Sure. Well, that is good news. I want to ask you finally, and excuse me if this is outside your sort of remit, but what's your take on how well we are planning ahead for the impacts of climate change in our city planning, our planting of forests, planting of trees, because, as I said, we're seeing all these wildfires right now across Europe, and extreme weather events are becoming more normal. So how well are we planning ahead using, fire-resistant materials and having gaps in between, tree lines?
Right. We're getting better. I mean, we are smart enough to see what's happening today and to prepare for the future. So in the urban areas, this means planting trees because the shade lowers the temperature immediately. It means having reflective white roofs on all of our buildings, which send a tremendous amount of incoming solar radiation safely back to space, cool buildings, and allow us to use less air conditioning, which means less CO2 emissions from fossil fuel use and less HFCs. So there are things to do, and there's a wonderful group that does some smart surfaces based globally, and they are helping us get the urban areas prepared for the areas that you mentioned where there are wildfires. It does mean doing controlled burns, getting rid of the underbrush that is the tinder that makes the fires even more powerful, even stronger, and building with fire-resistant material, and not building in certain places. Stay out of the fire-prone areas.
Hey, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Durwood Zaelke there, President of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development.
You're welcome.